Jury, what you review.
Oh, sorry. You asked me to review the photos from the crime scene, and then the emergency medical records from South Shore Hospital, Brigham and Women's Hospital, and then the records from her hospital stay at Brigham and Women's Hospital, which would put her into severe hypothermia.
And did you note that she was tachycardic and hypotensive?
Yes.
What did that mean?
So it means that her heart rate was above 100. And hypotensive means that her blood pressure was...
In your experience for a number of years in the emergency room, have you had occasion to treat people that have tried to commit suicide or have successfully committed suicide by cutting their throat?
Multiple times.
Before we get into the testimony, there's something important to understand about what the jury is hearing here. This is not simply a doctor describing a few injuries. It's an emergency medicine witness walking the jury through a chain of events involving severe trauma, self-inflicted injuries, profound hypothermia, spinal fractures, massive blood loss, and ultimately a cardiac arrest. And as the testimony unfolds, pay close attention to the distinction the doctor repeatedly makes between what the injuries show medically and what he can actually say about intent. That distinction becomes extremely important. We're about to hear how a Glasgow Coma Scale score of 10 indicated that the patient was seriously impaired on arrival, why doctors had to intubate and ventilate her, and why her condition was serious enough to require transfer to a higher-level trauma center. Then the testimony gets even more intense. The doctor describes injuries to the wrists and neck, multiple spinal fractures, significant hemorrhage, and a cardiac arrest requiring CPR. But there's another key moment to watch for. When the questioning turns toward whether the injuries were consistent with a suicide attempt, or whether they could indicate something else, the judge steps in and limits what the witness can say. So ask yourself, where does medical evidence end, and where does speculation about a person's intent begin? That line is crucial in a courtroom. As we go through this testimony, listen carefully to the terminology, because the attorney is translating complex medical evidence for the jury one piece at a time. And by the end, we'll have a much clearer picture of what this physician can establish from the medical records, and what remains outside his expertise.
In the course of your training and experience, sir, do you work full-time in a particular field of medicine?
Just emergency medicine. So basically we see any and all comers, anything from ankle sprains to traumas.
Okay. Did I ask you to review some documents regarding this particular case involving Lindsay Clancy?
You did. You asked me to review the...
Jury, what you review.
Oh, sorry. You asked me to review the photos from the crime scene, and then the emergency medical records from South Shore Hospital, Brigham and Women's Hospital, and then the records from her hospital stay at Brigham and Women's Hospital.
So in reviewing all of those various hospital records, sir, you're aware that on January 24th of 2023, she initially was transported to South Shore Hospital. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And can you tell the jurors what's treatment she received at the South Shore Hospital briefly?
So she arrived with a GCS of 10, meaning she was not really very responsive.
Let me interrupt you just because that, what did you say, a G6?
GCS, Glasgow Coma Scale.
Okay, slow down, because I don't understand. What is a GCS?
It's a Glasgow Coma Scale. It's a series of things that we look at to determine how responsive somebody is, you know, whether their eyes are opening spontaneously, whether they're able to speak on their own, and whether you're able to understand what they're saying, and then how much, if at all, they're moving, whether they're moving spontaneously, whether they can follow commands, that kind of thing.
Okay. So the Glasgow Coma Scale GCS of 10, what does that tell you as an emergency room doctor?
Tells us that she was not very responsive on arrival. It sounds like she was not speaking intelligibly, and the doctors at South Shore Hospital were concerned about her ability to maintain her own airway and made the decision to intubate her, which means putting a breathing tube down her throat into her lungs and placing her on a ventilator and sedating her.
Was she also, what would be, I guess, referred to as hypothermic?
She was.
What does that mean?
Means that her body temperature was below what's considered normal. So in her case, her core body temperature was, I believe, 82.1 degrees, which would put her into severe hypothermia.
And did you note that she was tachycardic and hypotensive?
Yes.
What did that mean?
So it means that her heart rate was above 100. And hypotensive means that her blood pressure was below what is considered normal.
And South Shore Hospital, were they able to stabilize her?
It sounds like they were able to stabilize her by placing a breathing tube in her neck, in her throat, to help with her breathing. And then they basically proceeded to obtain a bunch of imaging, started her on medications to sedate her and artificially raise her blood pressure. They started working on rewarming her, and then in conjunction with the trauma team there, they made the decision that she would be better served at a hospital with a higher level of care.
Okay. And can you tell us what the injuries were that she presented herself with to the South Shore Hospital?
So there were multiple injuries. She had lacerations to bilateral wrists.
When you say lateral, what does that mean?
Bilateral, both sides. So she had a laceration both to her left wrist and to her right wrist, and then multiple superficial lacerations as well. And then she also had multiple superficial lacerations to both sides of her neck, the front of her neck, and 2 deeper lacerations to the sides of her neck.
So when you say superficial lacerations and then deeper lacerations, do you recall what's the standard? What do you look for in something like that?
So it's tough. Everybody will describe them a little bit differently. In her case, I would describe multiple superficial lacerations, which would typically mean kind of scrapes on the surface of the skin, nothing that actually gets through the full thickness of the skin. And then she also had full thickness lacerations, meaning that she made it all the way through the skin into the subcutaneous tissue, the fatty tissue. And then you would need to describe it further if any additional structures were injured, which in her case they were not.
Now, in your experience for a number of years in the emergency room, have you had occasion to treat people that have tried to commit suicide or successfully committed suicide by cutting their throat?
Multiple times.
Multiple times. And can you tell us, in your opinion, to a reasonable degree of medical certainty, sir, as to whether or not this injury or these injuries that you observed were consistent with what you've seen in other suicide attempts?
Sustained.
And right here, we get one of the most important courtroom moments in the entire excerpt. The attorney asks the doctor whether these injuries were consistent with what he had seen in suicide attempts, and the judge sustains the objection. Why does that matter? Because an expert witness can testify about medical observations within the scope of their expertise, but that does not automatically give them permission to decide a person's ultimate intent or mental state. The distinction is subtle but incredibly important. Notice what happens next. The questioning is reframed. Instead of asking the doctor to determine whether this was a suicide attempt, counsel asks whether the injuries had an actual physical impact on the patient. The doctor can answer that, and he says the injuries were consistent with self-injurious behavior, while specifically acknowledging that he cannot gauge the intent. That qualification is huge. The testimony establishes that there were real injuries and medically significant trauma, but the witness is not claiming that the medical records alone prove what was going through the patient's mind. In a trial, that separation between observable medical evidence and interpretation of intent can be critical. What do you think? Was the attorney's revised question more appropriate after the judge's ruling?
Sustained.
Well, can you tell us, did that look like an effort to pretend or fake a suicide?
Objections. Sustained.
Well, when you looked at the injuries, did you make a determination that they appeared to have some impact on the human body of Ms. Clancy?
Yes.
What was that?
They were consistent with self-injurious behavior. The intent, I can't gauge, but...
Anything further?
Okay.
Next question.
Yep, thank you. How about the wrist? What did you observe about the wrist injuries, sir?
So she had 2 full-thickness lacerations, one on the left and one on the right.
What does that mean?
Means that she made it all the way through the epidermis and the dermis, which is what makes up the skin in the wrist, and into the fatty tissue, which is the next layer.
Okay. Are you familiar in your experience, sir, with hesitation wounds in a suicide attempt?
Yes, to some extent.
What does that mean?
Means typically that they're more kind of subtle, weaker attempts to hurt yourself, not necessarily anything that's going to be deep to the structures of the skin, but more just scrapes along the surface.
Okay, and you noticed some of those on the neck area as well, is that correct?
There were multiple of those on both the neck and the wrists.
As it relates to the injuries to the wrists, did you observe any vascular structures or penetration of the cervical, the fascia?
There was not.
Okay. What other injuries did you recall from reviewing the medical records?
So she also had multiple fractures in her cervical spine, which are the vertebrae that make up her neck, including what's called a burst fracture of C1. and then other fractures of C4. She also had fractures of multiple levels of the thoracic spine. I believe she had multiple transverse process fractures on both the right and left.
What does that mean, transverse fractures?
Transverse processes are lateral projections, basically projections that go sideways off of the bone that allow the ribs to articulate, connect with the spine, and they also allow muscles to connect, and they help support the basically overall ring structure of the spinal canal.
And was she then transported by med flight or life flight to a Boston hospital?
She was.
What does that tell you as an emergency surgeon when someone's transported by med flight or life flight?
Typically means that her injuries are felt to be severe enough that she needs immediate intervention and further treatment, that the hospital that is basically necessitating the transport is saying that they cannot provide at their facility.
She was then transported to what hospital?
Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston.
She was admitted to what unit?
Surgical ICU.
And you had a chance to review all those medical records as well?
I did.
Did she suffer a particular event that night that you recall from looking at the records?
She did shortly after arriving in the surgical ICU. It sounds like they were moving her, and when they moved her, they noticed that her blood pressure dropped, her pulse became faint, and subsequently she actually suffered a complete cardiac arrest and required 2 rounds of cardiopulmonary resuscitation with compressions and medications before she was able to be revived.
And
At this point, the testimony moves from serious injuries to a medical emergency involving multiple systems of the body. The doctor describes chest tubes producing blood from both sides of the chest, additional hemorrhage around the spine and mediastinum, and then explains why a high cervical spinal injury can create a life-threatening breathing problem. That explanation gives the jury context for just how consequential these injuries could be. Then comes another critical piece of testimony, the mechanism of injury. The witness says the records indicate that she went out of a second-story window, struck the ground, and that this mechanism was consistent with the injuries described. Notice the wording. The doctor is not saying he personally witnessed the event. He is explaining whether the reported mechanism is medically consistent with the resulting injuries. And that distinction matters. Medical experts can often help jurors understand whether a claimed mechanism fits the physical evidence, but that doesn't necessarily answer every question about how or why the event happened. By now, the testimony has established a progression: emergency treatment, transfer to a higher level of care, additional complications, cardiac arrest, hemorrhage, and extensive spinal trauma. The question is becoming less about one isolated injury and more about how the entire medical picture fits together.
And she also, to your knowledge, had suffered significant hemorrhage and had to have a fairly massive blood transfusion?
Yes, they placed chest tubes, which are basically plastic tubes that go into the chest cavity on both sides, and had about 300 cc's of blood come out from each side. And there was also noted to be significant hemorrhage around the spine and into the mediastinum, which is the portion of the chest that houses a lot of the organs like your esophagus, your trachea, blood vessels, that kind of thing.
Now, if there's a fracture, a serious fracture to, I believe it's C1, does that interfere possibly with a person's ability to breathe?
It does.
And how does that work?
So if you have a fracture that affects the spinal cord above a certain level, typically above the 3rd cervical vertebrae, it basically removes your ability to initiate breathing on your own. Your 3rd, 4th, and 5th cervical vertebrae, the nerves that lead from there, are the ones that are responsible for telling your diaphragm to go up and down and help you breathe. And so if you lose the ability to send that signal down to your diaphragm, you lose the ability to breathe.
Now, as it relates to your review of the medical records and review of the history, are you aware of the mechanism of the injuries that she suffered that you just described for the jury?
I am.
Tell us what that was, to your knowledge.
That she went out of her 2nd-story window.
And going out of the window, obviously, did she strike the ground, or?
She did.
And that caused the injuries, the mechanism of injury?
Yes, it's consistent with all of her injuries.
Now, with your experience, sir, with, as you indicated, dealing with people in the emergency room and treating people that have been involved with sequential acts of self-harm, do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as an emergency board-certified physician as to the effect of the combination of the multiple sequential injuries that you saw?
Objection.
Can I see counsel at sidebar?
I can withdraw it, Judge. I'll withdraw it. Just, thank you very much.
No questions.
All right, thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
And that brings this portion of the medical testimony to a close. Based strictly on the transcript provided, the physician testified about extensive injuries documented in the medical records, lacerations to the wrists and neck, cervical and thoracic spinal fractures, severe hypothermia, abnormal blood pressure and heart rate, significant hemorrhage, and a cardiac arrest requiring CPR. He also testified that the reported second-story fall was medically consistent with the overall pattern of injuries. But there is an equally important limitation. The doctor explicitly said he could not determine intent from the injuries, and the judge sustained an objection when counsel asked questions that pushed toward characterizing the injuries as a fake or genuine suicide attempt. Later, when counsel attempted to ask about the overall effect of the combined sequential injuries, the question was withdrawn after an objection. So while the medical evidence presented here is substantial, this excerpt does not contain a final verdict or judicial ruling on the ultimate issues of the case. We should not fill in those blanks with assumptions. The bigger courtroom lesson is that expert testimony has boundaries. A physician can explain injuries, treatment, physiological consequences, and whether a reported mechanism is medically consistent. Determining intent, responsibility, or ultimate legal conclusions is a different question. So what do you think? Did the medical testimony clarify the central issues, or did the limits placed on the doctor's testimony leave important questions unanswered? If you found this case as shocking as we did, make sure to hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more jaw-dropping courtroom breakdowns.